Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Chimera showroom. Welcome to Parkinson Design Week. It's drying here at least, and I'd like to introduce our second talk of the afternoon and introduce you to our two speakers who will be talking about the future of textile circularity. And first of all, we have Dr. John Parkinson. And John, some might say, is the original rag and bone man, and nobody in textiles knows more about wool and cashmere recycling than John. He has spent 3 decades learning the craft in the 70s, 80s and 90s, and then in 1995 he left the industry and he retrained. He went off into a new career. He became a doctor, but his passion for textile recycling was undiminished, and then in 2019 he set up Inuyo with his wife Linda, and Inuyo then came into the Chimera group of companies in 2022. And we also have Jodie Padgett, who heads up our innovation team. Jodie has spent over 25 years in textiles. She started off as a mender, and mending is part of the textile finishing process, and Jodie began by mending out faults through the after weaving, but she quickly moved into design and development. She then did a modern apprenticeship, and she went onwards and upwards and did a BSc in textile technology and manufacturing, and she's actually the brains behind many of the fabrics that you see through our timeline here. She now heads up our innovation team and is doing a lot of work to take us further forward into both wool and polyester textile recycling. So enjoy the future of textile circularity with Dr. John and Jodie.
Thank you very much, Ian. No pressure then, Ian. And thank you to Chimera for inviting me to come and talk to you, and thanks for everybody for turning up. I'll start off with my A up, just to get the tone from the Yorkshire dialect. Hopefully we won't need subtitles, and I'll try and bring the Yorkshire dialect down a little bit. But Yorkshire is the place where I'm from, and Yorkshire's where traditional wool recycling started in the UK over 200 years ago. So, on with the show. I'm going to start with a quote, just to set the scene in terms of what's important about recovering clothes and protecting our resources. So every second, the equivalent of a rubbish truck load of clothes is burned or buried in landfill, and less than 1% of all textiles worldwide are recycled into new textile products. So that's for me, that's quite an alarming figure, and one that says we should be recycling more stuff. And to build on that, one thing that I always argue is that waste isn't really a waste. We call it a waste, but it's raw material. It's gone, isn't it? Oh, it's come back. It's come back, thankfully. It's a valuable raw material. It's just limited by our imagination and sometimes by our skill. This is the mill in Dewsbury that still proudly has the words shoddy and mungo. And the trade that I went in from my earliest memories, 1960s, as a little kid, going around with my dad in a car, and he was a travelling salesman for a shoddy manufacturer. Shoddy is recycled wool. Shoddy are fibres recovered from knitted garments, and mungo is fibre recovered from woven garments. And you can recycle both, but they do different things, different jobs, to create different outputs. And that mill still stands with that proud shoddy and mungo term to show that that's almost the birthplace. Dewsbury is where that is. Batley, the town next door, is where the very first experiment with recycling textiles, recycling wool came. And it was a guy called Benjamin Law who had this idea. It was in a saddler's in London. He'd come down with his partners to a show. It was a just a cottage industry making cloth, and he came down to sell his cloth. And he was in a saddler's and he saw a bit of stuff sticking out, some fibres. And like we are in textile, he started to twiddle. And all of a sudden, he could see that maybe I can do something with this. He asked what was in the saddles, and there must have been old rags being ground up over 200 years ago before this, because it was just rough material. But he thought, I can spin this. How much does it cost, he asked. And as my son would say, he'd got told 10 bob and a Jaffa cake, which ain't very much. So he says, bring it. And his secret is spun and then wove some cloth, and eventually he sold them. He got better and better, but he kept it a secret. And that set the scene for 200 years. That's the secret of what he was doing, because it was cheaper and he had a competitive edge, were kept in families and passed down and passed down and passed down. And how to set your machine up and how to blend your materials were all kept in secret, and the secrets just went on and on. So much so that the woolen manufacturers that were buying this stuff didn't want people to know that they were using recycled wool. They wanted to be using so I'll just speak. I'll project. So they didn't want people to think that they were using recycled wool. They thought new wool, because like when I was growing up, if you're having hand-me-downs and jumble sales for your clothes, it was like a bit of a stigma. Now you go to a vintage shop and you were cool. And it was a bit like that for woolen manufacturers. They didn't want people to think they were using recycled wool because they were putting it in instead of new wool because it was cheaper. So there were stories about them having bales delivered under cover of darkness, so nobody would know, and coded as if it were new wool and not recycled wool. So the woolen industry in West Yorkshire was sort of full of all these stories. So many wonderful stories that I'll not have time to tell now, but I'll be around afterwards and catch me with some of those stories. We came into it in 1970 as a family business. My dad had saved up to buy his own place, so we started in 1970s recycling wool and selling it to woolen manufacturers, but they were declining, fewer and fewer of them. But we managed to keep going until towards the end of the 1980s. And we've been using our knowledge of buying certain materials at certain times. There were so many, what we call rag merchants and waste merchants, because still a lot of the people were making up, so the pre-consumer waste, there'd be loads of factories in Leeds making for Marks and Spencers, and all the offcuts used to go to waste merchants, and same as in the knitting factories were also doing the same, so knitting waste and all the post-consumer waste. The charities, the old rag and bone man thing used to call them tatters, were collecting all for shoddy manufacturers, sorting into different colours so you didn't have to dye. So when you reprocessed, shredded up the garments, you were recovering the dye as well as the fibre. So much so, the little town of Ossett, when you convert their Latin motto to English, to an English form, it's useless things by art made useful, and that town just did that. They took in all the rubbish that people were throwing away, discarding, and turned it into beautiful new yarn and cloth. We kept going until end of 80s, and then we lost my dad, who was there, and what do we do now? How do we stay in business? So we decided, I'd seen, in a supermarket, and I'd seen this thing, recycled cardboard. It had never struck me. I've been in shoddy trade. I didn't think I was recycling. I saw the light went on, and thought, we just need to market our products different. We need to talk about what we're doing and tell the world about all these secrets and all this history and all the rest of it. We started a company called Evergreen to do that in 1990, and we were reasonably successful. Our best customer was Esprit, and they had e-collection at that time for 5 years, doing some wonderful pioneering work. And there's a crazy young bloke, which is an early iteration of me, talking about what we do on the next slide.
Shoddy is a textile term describing old material that's been reprocessed into new fabric. It was a business that thrived for 150 years until fashions changed and the market for thick or shoddy material collapsed. Most of the shoddy manufacturers went bust, and to survive meant change. So here in Dewsbury, Parkinson Shoddy and Waste became Evergreen. Fashion fashion from recycled fabrics with the emphasis on the environment.
From the early days, it was a commercial decision to keep in business, but from there we were able to develop new things using detergents that were less harmful, actually taking on the carding and spinning ourselves, ensuring that right through to finished cloth and into knitting yarn, that every stage of production being designed to minimise the impact on the environment, and from what starts off as being a commercial decision to stay in business becomes almost it starts to take over your life and becomes a crusade almost.
Into colours and type. To John, whose father had the original shoddy business here, these are more than just rags.
To me, we still use the word waste, but it isn't. I mean, I can see a batch of rags, and if it's a really particularly nice, I can get very excited about it, and they're beautiful, gorgeous rags, and you can start to get quite enthusiastic. Sometimes there's a delivery being made, and you inspect a bale, and you get really carried away, and you feel you could roll about in it. It's gorgeous, and people, what's the matter with it? But it's that love of the raw materials, and being able to tell one batch from another batch instantly and seeing the beauty in it. And there's a tremendous beauty in textile waste and raw materials.
The rags are shredded, then reconstituted into yarn, which is carded, spun, and then taken to local weavers to be woven into fabric. There's been no shortage of investment at Evergreen, and it's meant a lot of risks for John. He's experimented with different raw materials, and he's now working with recycled silk, cashmere, denim, and even hemp.
One of the big kicks is the fact that you are doing something different, you are doing something new, and now it's great that when people come from all over the world, Hong Kong, America, Canada and all over, people say, oh, I've heard so-and-so were talking about you in this part of the world and so-and-so, and everybody knows, in the design, anybody working in green knows, they all know Evergreen, and that's great, and it's almost like embarrassing, it makes your laugh, you think, well, tiny little those in the back of the car, and people are talking about us all over the world in design, about who's working with the eco-fashion, and Evergreen always comes up, and that's great. So we're doing something, we're making an impact, it's starting to happen.
So that was all quite a while ago, 30 odd years ago, when we were trying to do that. But what I'm trying to do as well is set the scene for where we are now. So going right back to 200 years when Benjamin Lowe first got this idea, and then where we come into the picture, and how we then came to join Chimera and become being able to help them with recycling and other textile recycling ventures. But we decided that we'd come back, after being away for 30 years, we'd come back to trade. Now we're just going to tell a few stories. But we found out there were a bid for some machinery, and I thought, it's all right telling stories, but people want to see that you can actually do it. So we decided, I'll tell you what, I'll put in for the funding bid, and then nobody can say I bought it. Because I won't get funding bid, and then I can sit in my rocking chair, and when I'm an old man, and go, it's okay. We got funding bid, didn't we? So then we got a machine, and we had to do something with it. And we started a business called the New World. That's the flower my little daughter drew when she was 7 for the Evergreen business 30 years ago. So we kept the flower. And the New World is an acronym, because I like to think that we never thought we'd come back into trade. And also, like I said at the beginning, it's never over for a waste. It can be made into something again. So it is never over until it is over, is why we've got this weird and New York sounding name. When I was putting it into company's house, so we're just going to have the I, the contracted I. It's never over until it's over. But for whatever reason, they won't have it. So I put the 2 I's on the end, and they said, yeah, you can have that. Nobody else is going to have it. Glass of wine might have been involved. Click the button and we became a New York. And so we started. What we wanted to do then was to get back to doing what we'd done all those years ago. We formed the New York. And from the first launch and the first branding, which was ours for the Craftsman, when we came in New York, we branded with Chimera, and that became the new branding. And my wife said, thanks very much, Alan, who's CEO of Chimera. It'll be another 400 quid for tattoo on other arm for you, but it never happened. It never happened. So we became part of we became part of the Chimera group. And what we wanted to do, as well as work with Chimera, is to recycle for the UK. So recycle the UK's waste in the UK for UK brands and manufacturers. So keeping things, let's say, local, the UK. So not exporting stuff across the world, not dumping it on other countries, but looking after our own backyard and recycling our own stuff, but making it into beautiful new stuff. And working with other manufacturers, taking their waste. They'll say, will you have our waste? Will you take our waste? If you'll take it back. And so there's a question mark, like in comics with Robert Heads. And then they realise that you can't just give it, you can't just have a tick, and Parky and Anuyo have just taken waste. We'll work, it's your waste, it's your responsibility. We'll work with you to turn it into a beautiful new thing that you can offer back to your customer. And Chimera have the same attitude, which is great. These are some examples of companies that we work with, and there are many more. And Savile Row there has now become a new project that Sue over here runs, called EcoLux. And if we'd have been in London down Savile Row last October, you'd have seen this display in the windows, the shop windows of the tailors there, showing that the tailor's clippings that used to just fall off the floor and didn't know what to do with it, couldn't use it, being turned into these beautiful new things again and shown back in Savile Row. Now, of all the hundreds of years that Savile Row's been going, yes, they would have been selling the clips to the old shoddy trade, but that's all gone. The last traditional shoddy manufacturer closed in 2000. In New York with Chimera are the only people left in the country doing it. And there's all the skills, all the secrets, all the trade, even the vocabulary was at risk of being lost, and our aim is to keep that going. And so that was something that was shown there. We're clearly wanting to do that with more people, and we are doing with third parties, as well as the work that we're doing with Chimera. And Jodie's going to talk a lot more about that in the next half of this. If I ever shut up, Jodie will talk a lot more about that in the second half. So I thank you for listening, Jodie.
Make my voice project as good as you do. I'll give it a go. I think I'm a little bit easier to understand than I'm a little less broad. So we're going to look at Chimera's products that we've got out at the moment and the ones that are coming in the future that are all dealing with recycling through the Inuio process. But just a little bit of background, we're part of a bigger group really that we work with academia. There's a lot of things that go on in the background that not necessarily anybody realises that we do. We're involved in funded projects, and there's a lot of things going on. But the subject today is recycling, so we're dealing with 3 different methods of recycling. Mechanical is what John's been talking about, which is where the fibres are pulled. Thermomechanical, if you know our product X2, that is thermomechanically recycled, but it will be changing to a chemical process. So I'll go into a little bit more detail in them in a little bit. So revolution really comes from the waste when this product's made. So the London Underground, we have little bits like this left on the cones. These are taken off, and by miracle, John creates these lovely yarns. So the yarn itself is 50% recycled with 50% wool, but in the overall fabric, it's 30%. So that's the product that's out at the moment. So you can see here, it's a simple process, and we've applied this to our next product. So back in, I don't know if we got this yarn from Evergreen. I think we looked at it in
We did supply it earlier from,
So in 1998, we had a product, when we were Interface, had a product called Rescue. So this is made from old army jumpers. We had 2 colours of yarn, and we created the 4 fabrics. I think we were a little bit ahead of this time. It didn't really take off, did the product. But what we've done now is, with this 50th birthday celebration, we've looked through the archives, and we've selected this design to bring forward to launch. So this will be launched at the end of the year. It's 75% recycled, and we've added 25% flax so that we get the higher rate flammability. But to me that's an old project that I've been working on. So the new things that I'm working on now is we've set up a pilot scheme with a couple of UK manufacturers where we take back customer waste. So when the waste arrives at our facility, myself and my colleague have actually been separating it out ourselves into different colours, and then we're making it back, blend it black with wool, and we get a milk product that's very similar to blazer. So it's 50% recycled from customer waste and 50% wool. But it's not, as John's already said, we're not a waste merchant. We're offering a circular solution for our customers. So that's the wool end. I have got all samples on here that you can all look at afterwards. So in 2012 we launched X2. So the black part of X2 has thermomechanical recycled content, but the new X2 will go from a very low amount of recycled content to 25%, and this is available, is it next month? Yeah. Next month. So it's been recoloured and the recycled content has changed as well. So a lot of the waste comes from not only our internal waste, but waste from the sports apparel industry. So what's the future, what we're looking at? So we're always looking at different ways we can work with John and Inuio. It's like what's the maximum recycled content, how fine can we get the yarn? So we're always working on that, exploring different waste streams. But we're also looking at monocomposites. So if we have a product that's laminated with float foam, that the laminate is now 100% wool or it's 100% polyester, so that product can then be recycled. And where we've got nylon in a product, can we remove it? Can we change the structure in some way so that we're getting back to a monocomposite? Sustainable flame retardancy, we're always exploring. And in Inuio, they're working on an automated sorting and recycling initiative. But let's finish on John's quote. So waste isn't really waste, it is a raw material, only limited by our imagination. And I'd like to say thank you, and has anybody got any questions?